A 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a 5 and a 6 and a 7 and an 8 and a 9. It's Not Your Mama's Christian Podcast. Welcome everybody to Not Your Mama's Christian Podcast, a Christian podcast that doesn't take itself too seriously. I am your host, Shane, here with my brother.
I'm hoping we'll have people that are listening because they are really into the topics we're talking about. And we had a guy who was very smart, and that I think if he heard the intro, he might have refused to come on.
Wow, I counted. I talked about.
I would have.
It was the 9 Enneagrams.
I would have refused.
You would have refused.
I said, you know what? If this is the type of podcast I'm going on, these two clowns are not going to take this seriously. So a little tease. We have very, very important guy in the Enneagram world, I believe, that I was super excited about.
Yeah,
have
absolutely.
A chance to. We have a bunch of friends that were super excited about. But anyways, Shane, let me ask you a question.
Just Eric, ask it.
I know, you're right. How many self-assessment things have you done, or surveys to understand who you are, or maybe even like a relationship?
Yeah.
So what stuff have you done before?
I've done the love languages, 5 love languages.
Yep. What are the 5? Can you remember them?
Yeah, I talk about all the time in like premarital counseling. Physical touch, words of affirmation, gifts, receiving gifts, acts of service, and quality time.
Here's what I have trouble with these before you continue all the other ones. When I took the quiz, I knew I was doing the quiz going, I know what I can get what I want to get. I know what questions are leading to what answers. I like them all, but physical touch.
You don't like physical touch?
I mean, like,
well, but see, that's the thing. People confuse
sex.
it. Yeah. It's like holding hands or like PDA.
Yeah, no,
sometimes,
I don't like that much.
Yeah,
I
don't
anti
either.
it, but like I don't like I love gifts and I love giving gifts. I really like words of affirmation. That's probably number 1. I really like quality time.
Yeah.
Act service is probably low, but so those 3 are like my top 3.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 5. All of them are good.
5.
All of them are good.
It's the majority of them I am.
Yeah. But I've taken that. I've taken Strengths Finder.
Yeah.
And then I've taken like a ton of
APEST.
I've taken APEST. And then I've also taken like just spiritual gifts.
EQ.
EQ. Yep, I've done that as well.
What's EQ? If anyone doesn't know what EQ is,
that's like emotional intelligence.
Yeah, where do you have IQ, which is your intelligence. EQ is your emotional intelligence. Have you ever met somebody that's a really smart person, but they can come across as a little socially awkward or anything like that? That's because they're probably low in their EQ, and studies show that you can improve your EQ pretty easily if you work on it. IQ is hard to improve, but EQ you can improve a lot. So I was like in the mid. No, I was like a little above mid.
Yeah.
I wasn't like great at my EQ, but also with that one. Because there's some of these assessments I don't like actually taking the test themselves.
Yeah.
But some with that one, like I don't like to ever do extremes. Like when you take a quiz, like never do this or always do this.
Right. It's like a 1 through 5 or something.
I never did those, even if I felt like I should have. I always did 4s and 2s, and that led to a lower EQ score for me.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the EQ score I got is actually correct or not.
Yeah. So, but today we're talking about the Enneagrams, and the Enneagram is something that has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
But recently has become very popular and extremely popular. And actually, I have not really had very much experience with the Enneagram.
It was I'm not gonna lie, and if Chris is listening to this, like it was a struggle to try to get you to take this at first.
Yeah.
You just because and here's my prediction.
Take the Enneagram test.
Yes, to find out who you are.
Yes.
Here's my prediction, because I've done so many of these tests, and I love Strength Finder's test.
Yeah.
I thought those results, I'm a maximizer, competition, significance.
Yeah.
When I got the results, like, okay, this really matches me. But other ones, like love languages, like EQ, I feel like that doesn't really show who I am. Plus, there's bias, which Chris talks about. So my theory why it took you so long is because of that, number 1. And number 2, because everyone was talking about it. You're like, I know everyone, I don't want to be part of just the trend.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, it was definitely so many people would come up and be like, "Hey, what's your Enneagram number?" I'm like, "I don't know," and I'm not even looking into it. Like that was kind of my mentality prior to this. And then I took such a hard stance that you can't go back.
Yeah, you don't look like a fool.
Yeah. So and then
all it took was to have the man who wrote the the very popular book on the Enneagram, Sacred Enneagram, to come on the podcast to make you finally
so
take it.
Once Eric said that, hey, we're gonna be interviewing Chris Heuertz, who wrote Sacred Enneagram, I was like, okay, I need to take this.
But now that you've taken it, what? I know you only know so much about it.
Right.
What's your thoughts so far?
I mean, so far, I'm extremely overwhelmed.
Yeah.
And I was texting with you and Frank, who wrote a lot of the music that we play here on the podcast. From
All of it.
And
he gets nothing for it.
Yeah, not a dime. But I after talking with you guys, after taking the assessment, and Frank was telling me all these things. So I'm a 7.
Yeah.
And a 7 and a 2, which we talked a little bit about in the interview. But as soon as Frank heard that, he just sent me all these things as to about like who I am. Like, he knows me. And I was just like, this is a lot. Like, this is a lot to take in right now, because there is so much information about each type. And if you haven't taken the Enneagram yet, I would encourage you to pause the podcast.
Yeah,
and take it, because then this episode,
you can Google any.
You can Google it. There are paid ones and free ones. I did a paid one, but it was like $12. And but like go and do it, because this episode will be much more beneficial to you, and you'll be more clued in on the things that we're doing. And it is something that is very helpful, and I think that it is going to help me to understand more about who I am, and understand more about how I interact with people, and how I interact and how other people interact with me.
It can be very overwhelming at first when you really start to dig deeper, but I actually kind of like that, because we are all so unique that it has to be more than just, you can't just take the whole population and say, okay, you're one of these 9. And Chris talks about it, how there's a lot more, even in each one, there's 3 of those, and in each 3 of those, it's like it goes deeper, where all of a sudden you have over 100 subtypes that you can possibly be, because we're all made uniquely in God's image. We're all different. But just really quick, before we get to the interview, let me just talk about the 9 types to remind everybody. Hopefully you paused this if you have not taken it and taken that, and came back. And if you already taken it, just to remind you of what all the types are. There's type 1, the perfectionist. The perfectionist is responsible, improvement-oriented, self-controlled, can be critical. That's type 1. Type 2, which is my wife. You scored really high in type 2. Yep. Chris talks about that for you. They're the giver, or they're also called the helper. Very caring, warm, relationship-oriented. They just want to help people. Type 3, which is me. I'm a type 3. The performer. They're fast-paced, they're efficient, they're goal-oriented. Type 4, which is Frank, who's I know is listening to at least this one, does all the songs for free. He's more the romantic, deeply feeling, authentic, expressive, artistic, can be dramatic and moody and self-absorbed. Type 5, which is the observer, analytic, self-sufficient, thoughtful, can be withholding and detached at times. There's type 6, which is the loyal skeptic, trustworthy, questioning, problem solver, intuitive, can be doubtful, and fearful. And then there's type 7, which is you are, Shane, what's type 7, Shane? Do you remember?
What's the title? I don't remember what the title is for it.
Well, there's so many different titles. There's like loyalist 1. This one's the epicure. But what
the enthusiast is what
enthusiast? Yep.
No,
loyalist is 8 actually. 7 is upbeat, adventurous. They love possibilities and pleasures, and they're always hungry for more.
We're fun.
Like if you heard us talk about your birthday thing a couple podcasts ago, that's a 7 example.
It explains
for sure.
it, and I don't appreciate you trying to suppress who I actually am.
Okay, 8, the protector. They're strong, direct, action-oriented, seeks justice, can be overly impactful, excessive, or impulsive. Chris said he is an 8. And then our ex-host, pour one out, Topper, he was a 9, which is the peacemaker or the mediator. Easygoing, comfortable, seeks harmony.
Yeah.
Can be self-forgetting, conflict avoidant. That is Topper for sure. Knowing Topper. Yeah. So I love the Enneagram. It's helped me as a pastor and as a leader. If you are in a leadership position, you don't have to be a pastor by any means. If you are in a position at your work where you are a leader, I highly recommend you take it and then start to learn more about your type and the other type so you can lead people better. I found myself leading the people that I need to lead better, understanding who I am as a type, understanding when I'm healthy and unhealthy, understanding the things I need to do for my own spiritual well-being, and seeing how other people are made and designed and why they might do things the way they kind of do things. Talk about how we got that and how our need for love is coming out. And so I highly recommend you taking this Enneagram assessment, learn your own type. And if you have not read any books on it, you have to read the Sacred Enneagram. Yeah. I read it. I want to read it again. Frank, who said he doesn't read any books, had read it like 2 or 3 times.
Wow.
That tells you how good of a book it is. So we had the author of that book on our podcast, and it was an awesome time just to talk about all this stuff, all the Enneagram stuff with him. So let's get to our interview with Chris Heuertz. Chris, what got you, I know you talk about it in your book, but what got you into the Enneagram and really diving in like this and becoming an Enneagram coach and writing a book about it?
Yeah, so I learned it when I was part of an international humanitarian organization. I was the director of this community, and at its sort of most inflated point, there are around 350 of us involved. And as you can imagine, any tool like this that sort of helps describe personality structure, how folks relate to themselves and subsequently to others was really, really helpful. Mm-hmm. The problem is I didn't go very deep. I'd read a few books and sort of armchaired it. But a few years ago, well, actually 7 years ago, my wife and I started another organization, a little Center for Contemplative Activism, to essentially help people who are helping people, to teach humanitarians, activists, human trafficking survivors, refugees, contemplative practices, and found that, man, this is a really great support to that contemplative journey, to nurturing and nourishing your spirituality. So I went really deep, started training and studying with some of the world's greatest teachers, and it's just sort of changed everything for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how has the Enneagram changed the way that you look at yourself and changed the way that you look at other people?
Well, I think if you're handling this teaching the right way, it inevitably leads you to greater compassion, and that compassion has to start for yourself. It has to start with radical self-acceptance, and I think once you have this sort of sense of radical self-acceptance, that allows for compassionate living in the world.
Yeah. One thing, we have a friend of ours who I know is going to listen to this, worship director at my church, who got me really into it, who loves doing Enneagram stuff. We found with him, he was a guy that once he started to learn, he's a type 4, right, Frank? Once he started to learn his type and then how his wife was and how they interact together, he really found a way to be his healthiest self. And he's a guy, like, we've done Strength Fighters with him, we've done EQ with him, and I love all those, but none of those connected, but this really connected. So why do you feel like this is connecting with people in a more intimate way than some of the other things maybe?
Well, I think this is a lot more complicated than your Strengths Finders, or let's not say complicated. I think this shows the complexities of who we are in ways that Myers-Briggs or Strengths Finders or some of these other things fail to show. This describes the contours of really what's going on in our motivations and I think really personal ways. And I think it lands well when somebody's ready for it, when somebody's ready to be truthful about who they really are, because that's the problem. Most of us don't know that we don't know who we are. And I think until we're at least ready to confess that and to allow that to sort of be devastating to our egos, this won't be of help. I also think that it's become really popular lately because in an age of tricked out social media accounts, we're just projecting this sort of ego mythology. We're just projecting who we want people to see us as. We're just projecting who we wish we were, and it's highly curated, and it's it's a little exhausting to have to sort of chase down all these likes and retweets and, hearts on these posts that are maybe the illusion of our hollowness, our loneliness, our emptiness. And so in an age of social media, when we've done so much work to sort of curate these digital brands of how we want to be seen, I think there's a crisis of identity. And that identity is, I don't know who I am anymore. I'm playing the game to sort of make myself more attractive or likable publicly, socially, digitally. But at the end of the day, who am I really? And I think this helps folks find that. I think this helps folks answer some of those questions, those existential, restless questions.
And that's really interesting that you bring that up, because I was wondering how many people encounter or discover their type and are disappointed with it. Like maybe they were hoping that they were a different type or a different number, and they were like, oh no, I wish that I was a 7 or whatever, because I hear that 7 is the one that most people look at as being, I'm a 7. So.
Yeah, it happens to be your type.
But so what happens for that person where they get to a point where they haven't reached that realizing what they are, who we are, and that it's not bad or anything like that, but instead it can be a positive thing? And do you encounter a lot of people who are disappointed with the type that they find out that they are?
I don't think it's disappointment as much as it's, like I said, there's a kind of humiliation that some people experience when they sort of align with type, and it's a humiliation in terms of, that's me, there I go again. That sort of exposes some of these things that I've been trying to hide or have kept in my shadow. That's the playbook on my vulnerabilities or sort of my addictive habits. And my sense is what's humiliating about that is a lot of the things that we try to hide are, in fact, of course, obvious to everybody in our lives. Mm-hmm. It's just that we, like I said, park these things sort of in our subconscious, unconscious shadows, and we don't contend with them and we don't deal with them. And so what the Enneagram does is it sort of brings that into awareness and says, here's the beautiful fragments of your whole that you have severed, and you get to now incorporate them because they also belong. Mm-hmm. And we have to realize this, that if one part of us doesn't belong, then no part of us can truly belong. Yep. But you see, that's what we've done to ourselves. We've divided up and broken up and broken off the parts of us that we think are the least desirable. And the Enneagram makes room for them. It actually, like I said, brings compassion for them. It actually shows us how they also are inevitably and necessarily a part of the whole. So
one thing I've heard said a lot by people when they start to really discover themselves and learn more about themselves and their type is that you almost feel like attacked is the word I've heard people say. Like, man, it's like it's attacking me because it's so real about who I am and some of the struggles. And you talk about childhood wounds, which I know is not the best wording, but it's just kind of the best way it fits. So for the people that feel that way when they start to push into it and start to push back, like feel attacked or like look at their childhood wounds, like, well, that's not me. I didn't have those wounds. Like, what's the best way that they can truly discover themselves?
Well, so that's the thing. Like, I will say this, like, if you feel attacked, if you feel bullied by this, if you feel shamed by this, like you're missing the point. Like, mm-hmm. and the bummer is for a long time, that's how it was taught. It was taught through the shape of your tragic flaw. It was taught through so-called sin tendencies. And I think that also misses the point. Like I said, I just think this has to sort of lead us to a real sort of celebration of the gifts of who we are and every aspect of what that means. So if you feel attacked or bullied or beaten up by this, if you feel like this is sort of suffocating you, like I'm afraid that you might be sort of wading in some murky waters where there's maybe another teacher or author or book or way to sort of be introduced to this. And yes, I also think that the so-called childhood wounds are unhelpful renderings of the ways that we weren't loved perfectly and how we try to blame someone for that. I really don't think that they're real wounds. I think that they're misunderstandings. I think that they're the confirmation bias of our type to the earliest versions of our tender little ego who's trying to find their way in the world. And so again, this is where sort of nuance is important, because there's a lot about the Enneagram that I think is misrepresented. It's misunderstood. We latch on to these sort of little theories and we sort of turn them into to gospel, and we think they're unbending, when in fact this is a young tradition in flex. The Enneagram of personality, which is the sort of newest overlay to an ancient teaching, is only 45 years old. So there's a lot to sort of be excavated from it. There's a lot to sort of be mined out of this. And I think if you get stuck, and if you sort of double down on some things that are maybe a little misinformed, if you come at this with criticism and like I said, sort of a negative slant on the stunts that your ego has perfected, then it's not going to lead to flourishing. It's not going to lead to liberation. It's not going to sort of wake us up. It's going to keep us asleep.
We're both pastors, and I find that the people that resist not just Enneagram, but any of those strength finders, any of these, even though I think Enneagram is the best one for me, at least, that really dug the deepest and really got to the core of who I am. I find the people that kind of resist it and push it a little bit, they're just, from my experience, they're scared to find out some of those things that they know might be true, but they're pushing it down, and they're scared to like really allow that to come out and bring that out. I don't know if that's been your experience, but that's what I found for when I've talked to people about this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just human tendency. I think that there's a narrative that we want to believe. There's stories that we've told ourselves that we've made true, but you have to remember this, that memories are simply metaphors of impressions that are sort of the building blocks to these stories that we want to be believed, that we tell ourselves and live out of. And memories, I mean, eyewitness testimony is unreliable for so many reasons.
Yep.
And even our memories, like I said, are also unreliable. If we can understand them as the metaphors for the parts of our stories that we need to ascribe meaning to so that the story is more believable, then we are living in an illusion. And as much as we want to be truthful, as much as we want to wake up, I think it's hard work. And I think a lot of people don't have it in them. And that's okay. Like, I think when we're ready, a teaching like the Enneagram will be there waiting for us. When we're capable of allowing it to sort of chisel into us all the good and true and beautiful things that have always existed, it's there for us. But I think for some people, it may be too much too soon. And I think if it shows up prematurely, yeah, it actually has the capacity and potential to be unhelpful or to be dismissive. And that's why I think a lot of people also dismiss it.
Yeah. And so the Enneagram is, obviously we've talked about, has become extremely popular recently, but it's also becoming, and it also has been extremely popular in the church world and in the Christian community. And so for us in our context as pastors, how would you suggest churches can better utilize the Enneagram for the ministries in their churches? Well,
so I do think it's important for Christians to approach this a little bit with some humility. For 25, 30 years, Christians dismissed this, right? For 25, 30 years, Christians thought this was out of the occult. Like,
yeah.
They really beat some of these authors and teachers down pretty hard. And then, of course, a few years ago, a couple folks rub some Bible on this and make it street legal. And all of a sudden, Christians think they've discovered something. They think they've actually perfected this. And I'll say this, it's unfortunate, but most of the folks who come out of a Western historic Christian faith tradition working with this teaching are pretty sloppy right now. And you see the immaturity and the lack of depth in their own sort of lineage in this. So I'd say, first of all, approach this with humility and realize that some of the best authors and teachers and resources out there don't come from folks who are professed or who profess as Christian. Secondly, I think you have to look at this as something that points beyond personality, and that points back to our essence, our true self. That points back to the reasons our souls exist, and that's deeply spiritual, and there's something really profound in that. But there's also something that requires a lot of delicacy, because these are some of the more fragile bits of self that we've not truthfully encountered. So yeah, sometimes pastoral counseling might be great, but sometimes you need a psychotherapist, and I think religious professionals are the folks who are maybe least aware of the nuance and the difference of that, because the religious professionals position themselves as experts in fields where they're not.
Yeah.
And so I would just urge folks who come out of historic Christian faith traditions, especially in the West, to approach this with a lot of humility, that there's a lot more to learn and understand about this than I think is sort of popularized in some of the contexts where it's showing up.
Yeah, I think humility should be something that we're known for, but yet it's something we have to be like, hey, we need to show humility in this, if we're as followers of Jesus. Anyways, one thing I also love about the Enneagram is how I've been able to use it when it comes to like my relationship with my wife. I'm a 3, she's a 2, and how that connects with us. How have you seen this help marriages? And like, if you want, just since I'm talking to you and I'm one ear, if you want to use a 3 and a 2 as an example or whatever of how you work as a couple and in relationships, not even romantically, but with other people, how have you seen that just really help people grow and understand?
Yeah, so once you understand your own type, once you understand your own type structure, once you understand some of the patterns that are consistent and why they are consistent, and that's also, I think, really important, because if you don't understand the why behind what patterns are showing up, then yes, this looks fatalistic, this looks predetermined, this looks controlling, and that sort of takes away some of the mystery. But you see, what's mysterious and beautiful about each of us is there is a kind of cohesiveness to what it is that compels us to be as fabulous as we might and could be if we said yes to ourselves. So if you take a 2 and a 3, like you start to observe a few things right away, that these are both folks in their heart center, but one of them sort of overexpresses it and one of them represses it. And so even though there's a common or shared accent there's a really different way of relating to their emotional intelligence. You'll see that one of these styles, type 2, feels like they have to earn the love that they want, and type 3 in a sense kind of demands it through inception. They get what they want from us, and they make us think it was our idea, when in fact it was often orchestrated, manipulated, sort of played out. And that's one of the reasons 3s stay lonely. That's one of the reasons that the hollowness of the heart of the 3 is such a sort of a pain that they carry. You'll see that the conflict avoidance styles for the 2 is a positive outlook, reframing, recasting. They're trying to look on the bright side. They're trying to see the silver lining. They're trying to sort of de-escalate through optimism, while the 3 tries to de-escalate through objectivity, through understanding, through just trying to read the news of what's going down. And it may come across as cold or disconnected, when in fact it's not. It's their peace offering. It's the gift that they give. And when you start to see all of these aspects and components as they're different, but as they also align with type, then it clearly helps sort of offer a roadmap for relationships. It clearly sort of shows us even the ways that we get stuck. It even shows us how a lot of our fights are almost never about the fight. It's about how we accidentally got there by even trying to avoid it. And so it's remarkable. It's remarkable what you can sort of understand in this for relationships when you sort of understand your own type first, when you understand what's going on sort of under the hood of let's say in the engine of your own soul. But you see, that's the other problem here. A lot of people sort of come across the Enneagram. It makes a lot of sense to them. They sort of see these traits and quirks and foibles and idiosyncrasies and others, and they start to type others, and they start to put type on others. And that becomes a fun game for them when actually the real work here is to work on yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the sort of integrity and credibility that any of us would have, is I can only take somebody as far as I've gone myself. And so if this is something you want to use in your work, in your vocation, in your communities and in your relationships, the best way to share it is to work on yourself, to let your life be the example of how this can actually lead to profound ways of being transformed, of waking up.
That's interesting.
That's awesome.
So what I'm
I would gladly let you do any more threes than anyone else. But
I have to say, what I'm hearing you say is that threes are the worst.
Yeah, okay.
I'm just kidding.
One thing we've also, like, we're actually talking about this week.
Yeah.
When it comes to people, because there's so many different assessments you can take, right, for the Enneagram, and you can get mixed results on what person, and like I've seen a lot of people that take it and they get this number or whatever, and then they realize, well, I don't feel like that, I'm this. So for those people, like, for example, Shane, you took it and it said you were a 2 and a 7, but all of us were like, no, you're a 7, you're a 7, you're a 7, which isn't necessarily the right thing for us to do, is just to put that number on him and say, this is what you are, so get used to it. So, like, how have you seen people, like, what would you recommend if someone takes it and they're not sure, or they get type it's different than they think? Like, how do you go about that?
Well, so 2s and 7s will commonly mistype because, like I said, they're both in that triad of positive outlook or reframing. So 7s, it's not that 7s don't want to fight, but to de-escalate conflict, they will take that same style that the 9s and the 2s do in recasting sort of the opportunity in something that seems to be challenging. The 7s and the 2s also mistype because 7s are the only number on the Enneagram. They're one of the 2 anomalies in the entire system here that don't have a natural connection to their heart center, right? So they have adjacent numbers in their instinctive center and their head center. They have paths that reach to the instinctive center and to the head center, but they don't have a wing or a path into their heart. And so what 7s do is they overcompensate that by sort of mimicking the hearts in their life, by getting as close to those hearts as they can, and then sort of trying to consume or metabolize them into their own personality structure. And so 7s look like they're actually heart forward when in fact they're completely disconnected from the heart. And that's one of the reasons in the old days, Claudio Naranjo used to call the 7 the charlatan, right? The 7 was the one who would go to an Enneagram camp or workshop on Saturday and then be teaching it to their community the following week as if they were the expert.
Yeah.
But you see, they do that with everything, and they even do that with hearts in their lives. So there's lots of reasons that numbers will commonly show up as mistyping pairs. And again, understanding that the system sort of exposes what those reasons are. The thing about the test, though, is there's some challenges with the test. Like, there's some folks out there who swear off tests entirely. They think you should stay away from them.
Yeah.
Because you know this, every single test will come with its inherent biases. It's type bias, it's cultural and racial biases, it's phase of life biases. A lot of the tests are actually testing for personality, not for motivations. And we know that we're not our personality. Personality is the mask that we wear. And so, that's also missing the point. And then a lot of us test the test. A lot of us try to sort of flip the meaning behind questions over and over and over again. And so then we don't answer them the way that they are intended to help produce results. The other problem with tests is people try to test in the way they want to be seen as, or not who they are. And some people even say, take the test as if you were testing in your early to mid 20s. And it's like, no, take the test if you're going to, as the person you are right now, and be truthful about it.
Yeah.
If the tests don't work, then meet with somebody who's been doing their own work with the Enneagram for as long as possible. Find somebody who's actually gone inward and really allowed it to sort of open them up. And if that doesn't work, then you can find workshops, you can find trained professionals who do typing interviews, you can find panels out there to sort of observe what is common about, let's say, 4 or 5 or 6 people who identify or present as sevens, but what is also very different about those folks. And I think when you see that in real life, the impressions of it do start to sort of call something out of us. I also think that you'll start to see this more and more, and I predict over the next sort of 10 to 15 years, this will be one of the sort of new frontiers in the professional community. But there are 3 instincts that sort of that in, let's say, on a raw, rudimentary, fundamentally evolutionary level, shape personality. And I think this is a physiologically derived sort of instinctual aspect of what creates, let's say, sort of brain chemistry or sort of how personality actually is biologically sort of supported. And when you take these 3 instincts and you mix them with the 9 types, what you get are what some people call either the 27 subtypes or the 27 instinctual variants. And again, if you're having trouble typing, it might be helpful if you type as a 7 or a 2 to look at the 3 sevens, the self-pres 7, the sexual 7, and the social 7, or the self-preservation 2, the sexual 2, and the social 2, and see if within the sort of spectrum of 2s and 7s, if the nuance of how these instincts recast and reshape type might actually bring some clarity there. Because the 3 ways that type shows up based on these instincts really reframes it entirely. And it even gets a little bit nerdier than that, because if you stack those instincts, you move from 27 to now 54 based on their stacks. And then if you throw a wing on either side of those, you have 108. And this is how you end up with 108 types. So,
wow. And see, that's really interesting, because before I took it, anyone who asked me what my type was without me taking the test, they're like, "Oh, we think you're a 7." So you're right. As I was taking the test, the whole time I was like, I hope that I'm answering these so that I turn out to be a 7 without knowing what the result would be. And then going through it. So I felt like at time I was like, I want to answer the way a 7 would answer instead of thinking answering the way I would answer. So it is kind of challenging. So Chris, can I ask you what your type is?
Yeah, I'm dominant in type 8.
Okay. So what does that mean? And give us a picture of how that has influenced your life and the way you've seen that come through for you personally.
Yeah, so the 8 is one of the instinctive types. The 8 and the 1 are probably the 2 most sort of driven initiators of the 9 types. 8s sort of struggle with this fear, and all types have a basic fear. The 8's fear is not being in control, and that lack of control leading to their own sort of destruction. So 8's fight to take control back, and this can lead to self-destructive tendencies, which is kind of ironic, but that's how a lot of 8's feel alive. They feel alive on the sort of edge of their own sort of psycho-spiritual health. The 8's are sort of contrarians here, and this is rooted in their holy idea, which is really let's say the holy idea for each of the types is your unobstructed view of reality. It's the first truth you have to tell yourself. And for the 8's, that's holy truth. And so the contrarian aspect, this need to be against aspect, this sort of picking fights with others, is 8's on a subconscious level trying to get to the truth. And part of that truth is, can I trust this person? And will they stand up for themselves and push back? And if they do, then they will show their strength. And this also comes back to part of the fear of the 8, which is the fear of their own vulnerability, or the fear of appearing or being or even feeling weak. So you see all of these sort of things at play within each type. And these things that are at play are contradictions, because on one hand, they look like they are the sort of hard corners of the exterior shell of personality, but the truth is underneath all of them is hidden this basic human desire to be loved. And so the Enneagram really kind of just shows us that, the 9 ways that we attempt to get the love that we want, even if we're not being honest about it.
That's I could honestly have you go through each one of them, but I'm really not gonna. We're not gonna make you do that. But if you want, you can read your book, which I would highly recommend because you do that. So besides that, and like I've listened to the Sleeping at Last podcast that you help with, and I love that podcast. Just hearing your point of view and just you saying it. Plus, I can't remember the guy's name, but that makes the songs that just I love it. What other resources, if someone's really into this and like or wanting to get into this and learn more about themselves and discover themselves, what other resources would you recommend besides your book or any of those podcasts? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I do think the Sleeping at Last podcasts are really great because it's free, it's accessible. I think what Ryan did with those songs was absolutely brilliant. I think the podcast not only sort of talk and we try to be really, really candid about type and how to be a better version of your type, how to love people in your life who happen to identify as the type. But Ryan, what he did with his creative process and describing it, I think can be pretty inspiring for people. I think there's really good teachers out there. I of course think that anything that Helen Palmer or Russ Hudson or Beatrice Chestnut have written are great. And then, of course, Claudio Naranjo, the Chilean Gestalt psychoanalyst who really was the grandfather of Enneagram types, the Enneagram of personality. Just about anything that he's written or recorded out there is fabulous too. But I think a lot of the stuff that Naranjo has produced is maybe on a higher level than some of the basics. But like I said, I think you can go to the trainings and the workshops, you can listen to the podcasts and the summits, you can read the books. But unless you really do your own work with this, unless you really try to integrate the fragmented aspects of yourself, the Enneagram can actually be a distraction. It can be a tool for spiritual bypass. And we see that. We see a lot of people who know a lot about themselves and others, but haven't actually taken it into their contemplative practice, haven't actually incorporated it into their spirituality. And they're still toxic, and they're still dangerous, and they're still self-deceived, and they're still awake of broken relationships behind them. And so that can be a distraction. Like I said, if you really want the benefits of this tradition to take root, it does require, yes, a basic knowledge and understanding of the teaching, but it requires a lot of personal work here.
Well, all right, this is seriously the last question. I think I said that the last time, but this one really is. So somebody that has done all this, but has not put into their spiritual life and spiritual aspect, you talk about it in your book, but how would they, no matter what type they are, start to put this in their spiritual life and start to practically work on this to develop themselves?
Well, yeah, so that was the whole point. That was the punchline of my book, was to take these 9 types and to align them with pathways to nurture a contemplative spirituality, either with a primary focus of solitude, silence, or stillness, and then with a mindfulness meditation of saying yes to that solitude, silence, and stillness, to embracing and engaging that solitude, silence, or stillness, or resting in it. And I think, like if you look at like the 1s, 4s, and 7s, right? These idealists, right? The advice I gave there was for the 1s to rest in stillness, that you have done your best fixing yourself in the world and you're worn out. You're wearing us out. And so for you to rest in stillness is the very break that your soul needs. For the 4, it's to rest in solitude. It's to learn to love yourself and not have to be seen and validated as the most authentic and significant and realist person in your life. And for the poor 4s who struggle to locate their sense of origin and identity within themselves is part of the reason why they're making the world so beautiful outside of themselves, is they want that mirror to show them what they're unable to see for themselves. It's resting in that solitude. It's realizing you're the only one who can do this for yourself, but it's not something you can effort. It's something you receive. And then, of course, for the sevens, it's resting in silence. It's dialing down the noise of the preoccupation, the planning, the what's next. It's resting in the now. And that's painful for the sevens because sevens can envision what's around the bend. Sevens have these incredible dream boards and these hit lists of all the places they want to eat and travel and all the people they want to meet, but it's keeping them disconnected from the most important moment of their lives, which is this moment. We have this moment, which is the culmination of every moment we've ever lived, and this moment, which is pregnant with the possibility for every future moment we may be given. If you're living in the future, if you are preoccupied, then that's all wasted, right? So it's resting in silence, in the silence of being able to be present now, right? And so that's what we try to do there in that book. And in that book, I think I make it pretty clear for all 9 types that if you can't find a contemplative practice, a meditation practice, or a mindfulness practice to kind of help root you in that solitude, silence, and stillness, you're going to keep spinning your wheels. You can do your best to come up with the ways that you live into your spiritual traditions. You can do your best to frame what you think prayer might be, but I think in the ways that we have been, let's say, formed in our religious communities, it's put all the pressure on us to be better, to do the things the right way, to wrap the right words around our prayers, to read the right sacred texts, to make the right options for whatever it is that we think is going to save us. And at the end of the day, all that efforting is simply the quiet acknowledgement that we think we save ourselves. And I think in contemplative practice, we learn that we don't. We learn that the divine has always been reaching towards us. And there's nothing that we have to do other than to be present to that reach. It's not on us. And so I think if you can find a contemplative, a meditation, or a mindfulness practice, you can bring that into your type, and it really will sort of heal you from these notions of your so-called childhood wounds. I think it will release you from the addictive cycles of your type's emotional, passion, mental fixation. And I think it'll help you sort of remember what you've forgotten was always true about your essence, your authentic and truest self.
Wow. That's awesome. That's some really good practical advice. And as you were talking about the sevens, I think that Andy from The Office might have been a 7 when he said, how do we know we're in the good old days before we leave the good old days, right? Like
something like that, yeah.
Sort of mentality. But anyways, that's awesome stuff. And Chris, we really appreciate you taking the time to walk through a lot of this with us. And we want to encourage anybody to go and grab the Sacred Enneagram and check out all the stuff that Chris is doing. Chris, how can people find you and find your book and find some things that you're working on?
Sure. So you can go to gravitycenter.com. You can go to sacredenneagram.org, and you can go to chrisheuertz.com to sort of keep up with the schedule of workshops and retreats that we put out there. You can get the book, The Sacred Enneagram, wherever you buy books. And there'll be a workbook out in a couple months. And then the follow-up to that should drop in May of 2020. So.
Ooh.
Great.
I'm excited for that. Sweet. Chris, thank you so much. I mean, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. And when the follow-up comes up, then we'd love to have you back on and talk about that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
So thanks, man.
Thank you for listening to Not Your Mama's Christian Podcast. Make sure you subscribe and leave us a nice review. To support the podcast, you can go to our Patreon page, patreon.com/NYM Christian Podcast. Music provided by The Revived. Check them out at therevivedmusic.com. Stay connected with us by liking us on Facebook and following us on Twitter and Instagram.